What's going on, everybody? Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and whatever time it is. Welcome back to yet another video with you, man, Immersiaholic. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another faction overview for the Divided into Impera over mod for Total War Rome 2. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we are finally moving to Arabia, and we are checking out the Saba faction. That's right, we're checking out the Saba finally. They recently received, I believe it was a single new unit in the 1.2.8 update, so now it's time for us to jump in and check a map and see what they have to offer. Of course, we will go over the buffs and debuffs before we jump into the grand campaign map. However, before we do that, please be aware I am doing these overviews with the Grand Campaign Revised submod installed. The reason for this is that the submod will eventually be integrated into the Divided into Impera mod completely on its own, and so it will just become a part of an update and it won't be a submod anymore. So basically, even if you're using the 1.2.8 update, you won't necessarily see the exact same changes unless you're using the Grand Campaign Revised submod, or if you're doing this far into the future once those mods have finally been merged. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, let's begin by checking out the buffs and debuffs of the Saba. So we are part of the Malkain Arabiat cultural group, which is of course belonging to the Saba and the Nabateans to the northwest as well. But they will have to wait for another overview. So with the Nabateans, we share the Arabian trade heritage buff, which gives plus 10% wealth from all commerce buildings. Very nice buff to have, and definitely kind of sways you towards having a commerce focused economy, which really you should be because you're in a prime position, but we'll get into that a little bit later. And then you have the exotic goods buff, which gives plus 50% spice and slave resource production, which is very good because both of those resources are very close to you early on in the campaign, so you'll be using them throughout the entirety of your campaign basically. So that's what you share with the Nabateans. However, for the Saba specifically, we have the Blessed Arabia buff, which increases agricultural income. We then have the Spice Trade buff, which increases income in regions with markets. And then we have the Rival Neighbors debuff, which decreases diplomacy with other Arabian cultures. But we'll see just how much of an impact that has as we get into the campaign. So, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, let's get into the part 1 section of this video. Go check out the Grand Campaign of the Saba. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, here we are on the Grand Campaign map. And as you can see, once again, we are a, dare I say it, a one-hitter quitter. That's right, you have only one city in your starting position on turn 1 of the Grand Campaign, the city of Marib, which is the capital of Arabia Felix. And you have 2 other cities in this province. You have Udaimon to your south, and then you have Muscat to your far east, over towards Oman. So, you also start off with a walled city, obviously, because it's the capital of the province. You do also only start with a single army, although you do get chariots in that army with the new Grand Campaign revised changes. But before that, I believe it was just a cav unit and not a chariot, so that's helpful. Very powerful unit if used correctly, at least in Arabia it is very powerful. But you do not have any spies, that's quite literally it. You have a single army and it starts inside of your capital city. However, on turn 1, you can recruit multiple agents. You can get a spy instantly, and you can also recruit 2 dignitaries, which is actually very rare. It's not too often that you can get access to dignitaries, although I wonder if that is a new Grand Campaign revised basically addition to multiple factions. I'll have to look out for that, but that's definitely different compared to what it used to be. In the city of Marib, you of course also have the Great Dam of Marib. Now, this is one of the wonders that has been added to Divided into Impera. I will be doing a wonders guide, and in fact, the wonders guide should have already been released by the time you see this faction overview. Depends how I end up uploading it, but I believe that guide should be up first. So if you really want to see details of the wonders and all of them in Divided into Impera, make sure you go and check out that guide. It will go through every single wonder that has been added so far to the game. But for the Great Dam of Marib, it's basically a wonder dedicated to ensuring that your region gets extra growth. It will give you a boost to your sanitation. It hits you pretty hard in your wealth for maintenance per turn, so you lose 600 a turn if you upgrade it. You do get +2 growth per turn in all of your provinces, which is actually a nice little buff. And you get +8% wealth from agriculture in all of your regions, and a +0.5 to your first and second social class. So that is it. You do also get a levy camp already built for you, so that's very helpful. You don't have to sit there wasting time building up a barracks, which is good because it doesn't make sense, really. I really think this is a very nice change from the DEI team to add in barracks basically pre-built for all of the factions in the game. And then, of course, you start with a major encampment for your city. You can upgrade it to a central tribal encampment, and then you can go either way from there. But anyway, let's check out your diplomacy situation now that we've looked at basically your situation on the strategic side of things. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is very different to what it is currently in the 1.2.8 patch. And the major reason that it's different is that because you don't really have any clear-cut enemies. Before the Grand Campaign Revised Someone was released, Muscat and usually Hagar declared war on the Saba within the first turn or two. Especially the Muscat, they were actually the one faction around you that wasn't neutral, and they were aggressive towards you. So usually they would declare war. However, now that is not the case, and in fact the majority of factions around you like you and don't want to go to war with you if you're playing this on normal difficulty, which is how I conduct all of my Grand Campaign overviews as a basic kind of baseline difficulty level. So the Muscat are actually the most friendly towards you now. They have the green friendly relations at 31, so it's not super friendly, but it's, you know, basically the door is open to begin creating an alliance with them. And you do already have a trade agreement with them. However, you don't have a non-aggression pact, but they will definitely take it on turn 1. You can even get some money for that, so that's very nice. All of the other factions around you are neutral except for the Axum to your southwest. Doesn't really matter though, because you will want to defeat them anyway because they have gold. Very valuable resource, and basically you want gold and all of the other really good resources like spices, slaves down here you can get to your south from the Hinyar, and more spices up to your north to basically build your massive trade empire. But all of the other factions around you, despite that diplomatic penalty you get with other Arab cultures, you don't really have any issues, diplomatically speaking. Your main issue is making sure that you don't get too many friends, which is an actual problem for you, which I know sounds a little bit silly, but basically that means that you don't want to automatically ally with people just because they're willing to ally with you. So for example, with the Muscat, even though they're friendly towards you, I wouldn't get an alliance with them, because instead I would want to conquer their city and unify the province of Arabia Felix. So maybe just keep that trade agreement with them for a little while, and then break it eventually, and then go to war with them, making sure that you don't incur any diplomatic penalties. But your first target, of course, will be taking the city of Himya. This will give you the trained slaves resource, which is super valuable, one of the best resources in the game. And then you, of course, also have spices already in the city of Marib. And now this is very interesting, because I thought the majority of spices were being moved to buildings only, but none of the buildings in the city of Marib actually give you spice, and instead what I found is that it is a regional effect thing here. If we hover over your province effects at the top left hand corner of the screen, you can see it's the region of Marib. It says description, and then directly underneath description it says spice trade route +1 spices. So we get just one little spice because we are on a well-known spice trade route from India to the west. So that's really nice. It gets you started early with some nice little resources. And this is on top of your already defendable, favorable position. You're surrounded by desert that will take away the replenishment of enemy armies coming into your territory. It does sap away your own armies, unfortunately, but they have to march all the way over the desert and then they have to attack a walled city, which even the most bottom tier levy units of the Arab factions can hold this city against at least the standard army coming to try and take it. Some of the more well-equipped Greeks and whatnot may pose a bit of a bigger threat, but it's unlikely they're going to march all the way out here through all of Arabia and down to Marib without you doing something serious to stop them. But yeah, that's basically your diplomacy and your starting position. Let's go quickly over the economy and population, and then we'll move on to the military. So like I said early on when we were checking out the buffs, the game is certainly kind of trying to sway you in getting a commercial focused economy, and that means that your economy is focused on trading with other factions. This does not mean that you can't fight other factions. You might just need to be careful about who you choose to fight. For example, I would conquer all of the Arabian factions around you. None of them hold any importance in terms of trade, except for the fact that they all have resources that you want. So you don't need to basically get trade with them to gain access to their resources, when instead, for example, you could come up to Yathrib and take the marble for yourself. Because why not? It's there. It's not like it's a massive empire like, say, the Seleucids, who are up here, who have a lot of trade resources, and you're better off trading with the Seleucids rather than going to war with them, at least not until you're ready. So my recommendation for your economy is to focus on trade, especially if you do what I recommend with in terms of expansion, is going northwest up here through Arabia, take out the Nabateans, and after you take out the Nabateans, send a army across the Red Sea, and then march up after you take out the Axum, and then you do a two-pronged attack into Egypt. And once you take over Egypt, not only will you have one of the best provinces in the game in terms of money and income and everything, really. Egyptos is an amazing province, but you will have a port that then allows you to further expand your trading options going to the west. You can build a fleet here and then send out your ships to basically make diplomatic relations with any other major or even small trading kingdoms and empires that are out there. For example, it would make sense for you to try and get trade with Carthage and with Rome, or just one or the other, and try to basically cozy up to them and basically hate on their enemies. So that could be really useful for you. Now, if you really don't want to do a trade-focused economy, you can instead focus on agriculture, because you do get some buffs because you are the Saba, and you do have that dam as well, which helps with your agricultural income. So that's an option. Although you might not want to do that in the early game. That's more of a little bit of a mid-game thing where you start to take over some very prosperous land. For example, taking over Egypt is obviously a very good thing if you want to do an agricultural economy. Mesopotamia up here is a decent option as well, pretty good province. Syria can be okay as well, although I would say that's more so focused on industry and commercial income up there. But anyway, your economy is actually looking pretty good, not just because you have some amazing resources very, very close by, but you're in a great position to continue your trade. You also have the agricultural option if you don't want to trade with other factions, and then your armies are relatively cheap because a lot of your early game units don't have that much equipment, and even the ones that do have some equipment aren't all that bad. For example, the Arabian short swordsmen here, they're a unit that you're going to be using quite a lot early on, but they're actually pretty solid with an attack of 11, a melee defense of 9, although I believe it's supposed to be 8, they have that small little boost there, but their armor is at 20, which is not very good, but it's not that bad considering they only cost 98 per turn. Although granted, this is because they are in a army led by our king, but for example, if we go here, we right click on them, and we see the typical upkeep cost of the Arabian short swordsman is just 124 per turn. That's not really all that bad at all. Very, very manageable. So you have basically a very powerful economy, and you have, for the most part, pretty low upkeep units for your armies. So if your population can handle it, you can afford to use a lot of armies. So now let's talk about your population. Now, early on, it's easy to say that Marib is not doing very well in terms of population. On turn 1, you only have 15,500 people living in the city itself. However, you do have some very nice growth bonuses because of the dam and because you're the Saba. Plus, one of the very nice things that you will have playing as the Arabians is that you will be able to take over cities that have your same culture as the dominant culture. And so because of that, as you expand and take over all of Arabia, you'll basically replenish your armies without any issue at all, as long as you take them over fairly quickly before any other cultures do. For example, the Greeks, you want to take over these cities before the Greeks influence their culture too heavily. So you'll basically have the majority of Arabia under your thumb, but also willing to serve you in your armies. However, once you begin expanding outside of Arabia into Mesopotamia, Syria, Palestine, Egypt, etc., that is where you will notice that your armies may not be replenished as easily as they would be in Arabia. But it also might not be that much of an issue, because once you get to that kind of stage in the mid-game, you'll be wanting to use foreign units anyway, such as Greek elite troops, Greek cavalry, and heavily equipped units. Basically because your armies don't have a good alternative for yourself. You're using very light armored, very fast paced armies, and as you begin expanding out into basically the rest of the Mediterranean world and into Persia, you will need better troops. So you'll be relying on mercenaries, AOR units, basically anything you can get your hands on that is not just purely from the Arabian Peninsula. Not that you don't have great units and good options, you do. But, I mean, going toe-to-toe with a faction like Rome, Egypt, Carthage even, you will struggle severely. And you're really going to have to use some very good tactics against all of those factions. So, despite you initially almost having potential population issues because of the city of Marib alone, I don't think it's really going to hinder you all that much, because as soon as you take out your daemon, which you should within like the first probably 5 turns max, you will have another city that will have a decent population. Then after you do that, you come up here, march east to Muscat. You then have another city that gives you good population. Continue your march with your one army, march on Hagar. If you can take it, then you have another city that's a major population center. And it's also a walled city too, so that helps you even more. And very quickly, let's look at your historical family now that the Grand Campaign Revised Someone actually adds in historical families. The Saba do get their own. Your faction leader is Sama Ali Yanuf. He's 27 years old, so basically in the middle of his prime right now, kind of getting to his later years of his prime. He did have 2 brothers, Ali and Ali. Well, that's their middle names, I would assume, yeah. Malik Ali Yanuf and Obeida Ali Yanuf. So unfortunately, both of those 2 brothers died. You are the only living member of your family, thus you must get married nice and quickly and start producing a royal family to keep your people going, of course. And then you have the royal court, Yemenite nobles, and noble families as other political factions. Oh, and also you start off as a tribal confederation, which of course brings you a whopping -10 loyalty for all political parties, and plus 20% public order penalties due to presence of foreign cultures, which won't be an issue until you start expanding into Persia, Egypt, and Syria. So you may want to swap once you start getting into the mid-game, or swap early on so you don't have to deal with this later on. I am actually in the process of working on a government types guide for Divided Impera, but my general advice for the Saba would be to swap to being a centralized kingdom so you don't have either of those 2 pretty big debuffs added to your kingdom, so you don't have to deal with them basically. And the upkeep and the empire maintenance, it does add up over time, but you get a big boost to your tax rate, research, and to your trade income, which is very nice. So that's about it for the Saba on the Grand Campaign map. The city of Marib itself kind of reminds me of the Russian situation for the Empire Total War game, because in Empire Total War, the Russians have their capital, Moscow, deep within the very harsh, winter-ridden area of Russia. Sorry. So because other factions have to do a super long march into your territory, you will see them coming. They will suffer massive attrition while they're doing that long march as well. You'll be able to ambush them, pick them apart, and basically do whatever you want with them. You can even force them into favorable engagements for yourself by using the terrain. You can see right here you have a valley, which is what the road follows. So perhaps you might want to place one of your armies up on top of the hills, so the enemy has to march uphill towards you, and you're in a better position. But yeah, you have a lot of options, and your capital is insanely defendable. Your main weakness with it is naval invasions coming in from the south from Eudaimon, or from the east from, for example, this landing point. Where is it? Over here is one particular landing point. There's another one right here, I believe, although I'm not sure if you can fit. Let's see if you can fit coming through these mountains. No, you can't. You can't fit going through here, but they can march around those mountains there on the side. And then we have another launching pad there, but that's it. And even then, if an enemy army does land at either of these landing zones, you will see them coming. As long as you are in this city of Eudaimon, it will give you line of sight on that province, or that region, I should say. So, and the city of Marib is super defendable, very prosperous. It's not the biggest province that you do get access to, unfortunately. If it had another city or two, it might be one of the most powerful provinces in the game, but because it's only restricted to 3 cities, it's going to be pretty, just kind of standard. Yeah, the main boost is its position in terms of trades. But anyway, I've gone over that for long enough now. Now let's jump into the part 2 section of this video. We'll check out the military of the Saba. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, let's check out the military of the Saba. Now, 2 things to cover. Obviously, being part of the Arabian cultures, the navy is borderline non-existent. Don't use it if you can avoid it. Generally, I don't even bother covering navies in these faction overviews, just because they're pretty limited in their usefulness and just overall usage for most factions in DEI, unless you're talking about the Greek factions or the major powers like Rome or Carthage. But anyway, just want to throw that out there. And the second thing is the reforms of the Saba are based on the Greek reforms. So that means that they have the Thurios reforms, where they have to unlock them at Imperium level 3, and they have to wait until at least turn 50. And then the Thorax reforms are set to occur at turn 120, but you have to have hit Imperium level 5, so it's very late tier indeed. Although you do only have one specific unit that is listed as being Greek, which is your Thurios Swordsman, so I'm not entirely sure if all of your other units are locked behind those reforms. I doubt it. If there is any other units, it would probably just be your champion unit, but anyway, that may change, and I wouldn't be surprised if it did change in the future, actually, to be a little bit more fitting to this unique faction. So let's start off with your general, though. Let's turn on the UI and see what's going on. There's all your beautiful unit cards. Let's hide the minimap, try and give you guys as much of the screen as we can. This is your Arabian Bodyguard Cavalry units. This is one of 2 options for your cavalry regarding your general's bodyguard, although there are 2 infantry options that you can choose as well. This is definitely the better of the 2 cavalry units, though. The other one is just your Sabine medium cavalry, definitely nothing special at all. These guys, they are a dedicated melee cavalry unit. Even though it says heavy shock in the UI, ignore that. You can ignore that because you can rely on these statistics to basically tell you the story of what a unit is all about. And because these guys have a whopping 17 melee defense, these guys are very, very good. And I could see this being an amazing unit to be using in online battles as well. So I definitely might try and use that for my own online battles moving forward. They even have a good armor of 38, very good attack of 10. They even have a little bit of armor piercing at 5 on top of a 27 weapon damage. So that's a really big weapon damage of 32. Bonus versus infantry and cav, 4 for cav, 1 for infantry. Fantastic unit, and of course 120 men per unit, as is all of your cavalry units except your chariots, because you're an Eastern faction and rely heavily on cavalry, so that's a big advantage that you get. over some of the Western factions. But now let's talk about your skirmishers. So starting from the left, we have your Arabian Slingers. Unfortunately, this is the only slinger you get access to as part of your core roster. Really, really terrible unit. It does what it says it does, in that it is an Arabian Slinger unit, so they will sling their shots. But after that, they are beyond useless. Do not let them get stuck in melee. They'll basically live for a few seconds before they get wiped out by a melee unit of any kind, really. Very terrible for anything other than just doing some very long distance skirmishing, which is nice. They have the range of 190, so it could be worse. But that's the only unit you get, so I would not rely on slingers in my Arabian armies. After that, though, we have the Arabian Light Infantry, which is a javelin unit for you. This is your only javelin unit you get access to that's an infantry unit, and it's dedicated to javs. Once again, though, very terrible, just low melee attack and defense, no armor at all. Pretty worthless outside of its dedicated role, which is basically skirmishing, throwing in their javelins, and they have 6 of those javelins, so they can definitely be useful, as can the slingers. But I mean, in the grand scheme of things, you need units that can multitask, and these guys absolutely cannot. However, we start to see a little bit of a silver lining in these very dark clouds, because we have your Sabaean archers. Now, these guys are nothing special. Although, actually, before I continue, let me state one very important thing for you to understand, is that all of your units are immune to desert attrition. It doesn't list it here. It doesn't list it in the unit cards, though, because we're in a battle. What it does say is that it's resistant to heat, so these guys won't get as tired as quickly when they're fighting in a desert like they are right here. But on the Grand Campaign map, these guys will not take damage from desert attrition. However, they will still take damage from very harsh summers, which deal, I believe it's a massive, like 20% attrition to your army, or a 10 or something really powerful, and it really kills a lot of your units in a single turn, depending on what turns per year you have the setting on. So harsh summers will affect all of your units and all of your garrisons, but your units can march through the desert, which is a massive advantage you have. To those of you familiar with the early Islamic conflicts and the rise of Islam, the Rashidun Caliphate especially, and their battles against the Romans and the Sassanids, that was a massive advantage that they had over those two factions. They were able to basically come out of the desert, wipe out garrisons and entire armies of these two massive empires, and then disappear back into the desert and not really suffer for it. So you will see that kind of tactics be available to you as you play as a Saba. Just a very important thing I wanted to point out to you guys. But yeah, you have the Sabaean archers, which is just a pretty standard archer, range of 175, which is pretty standard and respectable. It could be lower, but could also definitely be higher. But your silver lining in this cloud comes from your light archer spearmen. Although technically they are slightly worse at being an archer, since they only have a range of 165 compared to 175. Slightly less missile damage, however, they still have the same ammunition, and they actually have some decent melee statistics because they are obviously a spearman unit as well. They have a melee attack of 7 and a defense of 14, which is really, really nice. Their only major downfall besides this, besides these skirmishing kind of debuffs they suffer, is that they don't have any armor, literally no armor whatsoever, so it's definitely going to hamper them, but that melee defense will help them avoid being hit as often as they otherwise could be, and a lot of that is because of their large shield. But yeah, that no armor does kind of impact them pretty severely, but beyond that, that's your skirmishing department. Pretty basic, very low tier, low quality, but you do have some tricks of the trade, such as the immunity to desert attrition and your archer spearmen, which you'll definitely be needing in your campaigns. Next up, though, we have the spearmen section. Of course, now we have the Sabaean militia, very low tier 300 man unit that you get access to. I would not recommend using these guys unless you absolutely had to. nothing really worthwhile to say about them, except they have a decent little bonus versus cav of 8 and versus elephants of 7. But the morale is terrible, armor is non-existent, attack and defense is pretty subpar. I would not use them. We then jump up to Arabian Spearmen though, and their statistics are not all that better, and in fact the only two things that are better is your morale is up to 39, which is, you know, still not good, but it's better. And then the other statistic that is definitely better is their ammunition being at 5, and that's because these guys are basically some nice little short-range archers for you. You wouldn't be able to tell because you can't see the bow and arrow, but when we hover over the spacebar, we can see the range that comes out from the particular unit. For example, if I bring it up here, you can see the red lines that go out from the unit indicating their range, and they do only have 5 shots though, so it's nothing amazing, but every little bit does help get them some free kills and free damage to the hit points of the enemy units, and it will also help them fight off enemy cavalry, so that's very nice. This is the lowest tier unit that you would probably want to use in the front line, or like in just basically a garrison role or something like that. But yeah, nothing else too special about them, although they do only have 200 men compared to 300 of the Sabaean militia, although the militia don't have the bow and arrow. At least I'm pretty sure they don't. They just have a javelin, right? Let's make sure. Let's move these guys away. Check out their range of the attack. Yeah, the Sabaean militia definitely don't come out as far. You can see their radius right here, coming in like this. That's the Sabaean militia, whereas the Arabian spearmen go way out here. So, very clear difference. But anyway, let's put these guys back here, and then let's move on to your next unit, which is your East Coast levies. Now, these guys are actually better than the Arabian light spearmen. For the most part, pretty much across the entire board. The only thing that they're lacking is the ammunition, because they only have a javelin, not a bow and arrow. But they actually have armor, an armor of 20, a melee attack of 7, a defense of 14, bonus versus cav and elephants of 10. These guys are no joke. Even though they have levy in the name, they are arguably one of the best levy units you can get in the game. At least a unit that actually has the word levy in the title. These guys are definitely a step up. Very strong. Their armor will help them out, as will their decent melee defense. I mean, these guys are not going to win you any battles, but early on they will present a fairly substantial main front line for you, while your swordsmen and camels and cavalry begin doing the serious outflanking. So not a bad unit at all. I would definitely be using that in my campaign. However, we'll then get to your better, and dare I say it, elite spearmen. Next up, we have the Sabaean nobles. This is one of your 2 infantry units you get to choose for your general's bodyguard, and wow, what a fantastic unit this is. We're back to seeing a bow and arrow option for them with an ammunition of 5. Additionally, we also see, not only do we see good statistics, but look how badass these guys are looking. I love the Saba roster. The majority of the units look fantastic. Definitely give the early Caliphate vibes to those of you who have like myself binge watched any kind of historical video you can on YouTube and documentaries about the early rise of Islam. This is a really fantastic faction to kind of relive the early days of the rise of Islam and relive it in Total War Rome 2, rather than relying on basically going to Attila and using medieval era mods, or playing Total War Medieval 2 as well. This is basically an even earlier version of that time period, where we're getting units that have very similar types of equipment, plus strategy and style of fighting. So this is going to be for all of you early Islamic era history lovers out there at the very least. Like I said, you have the bow and arrow. You can actually see it on most of these guys, which is really nice. I really can't get over how good these units look, and they're only going to get better as we get into more elites and more types of units as we move forward. Oops, didn't mean to do that. They have an armor of 28, which is the best we've seen so far, not including your general. Melee attack of 8, defense of 16. They even have a little armor piercing of 4 with a weapon damage of 24. Bonus versus cavalry and elephants of 12 each. Base morale of 49. Fantastic unit. Of course, because they're Sabaean nobles, though, they will be more expensive and harder to come by due to population. However, when you can get them, get them. They're fantastic and just very, very nice. Your biggest downfall with them is that they do not have any kind of formation. Their only formation is standing next to each other, really. They don't have any disciplined formation you can put them into. And because of that, they're also going to suffer due to morale penalties since they don't have the disciplined formation buff. Although they do have expert charge defense, which will help them. But yeah, just a fantastic unit. And then it somehow gets even better. Well, we jump up to the Sabaean bodyguard infantry. Now, these guys don't have any skirmishing capability, but these guys are basically a thorax style spearman when compared to the Sabaean nobles. So I'm guessing perhaps these guys come after the thorax reforms. Melee attack of 9, defense of 21, total weapon damage of 30, bonus versus cav and elephants of 14, and an armor of 35. And these guys do have the disciplined buff, which is very nice, helps them with their morale, which is a whopping 52. These guys are slower than most of your spearmen, but they are far better well equipped and far better trained. Fantastic unit overall. And just like the last unit we looked at, they look friggin' amazing. I love these helmets. Just, man, the entire aesthetic of the Sabaean roster is extremely badass, and I'm so happy that we even have another really cool unit that was added to the roster that we're about to check out, because, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for your spearmen. You're obviously a very spear-focused faction. You have the majority of your spear roster, though, being basically levy spearmen. Doesn't mean that they're not useful, but it does mean that they will get annihilated against the more disciplined spearmen of, say, the Diadochi Greek factions, or of the more disciplined factions overall, like Rome and Carthage, for example. So just be aware of what kind of factions you want these men to fight. If you want to fight against those, you might have to rely on using armies of your elite warriors instead of only your low tiers to give you a main bodyline. But anyway, let's go on to your swordsmen. We don't have a lot of them. And then on to your cavalry. So first up, we have your Red Sea Light Infantry. These guys are essentially a levy tier swordsman unit for you, although they're a little bit better than the levy. In fact, they are a pretty solid mid-tier option for you, although they're at the bottom of your swordsman. An attack of 9, defense of 8 is not great. The attack is okay though, and it will improve as they get experience, so that's very nice. Charge bonus of 28, so make sure you give them a charge, because that charge is very, very strong. That is not bad whatsoever. They even have a weapon damage of 19 on top of that, and armor piercing damage of 14. These guys are basically the closest thing you get to axemen. You can see all of their unique looking weapons as well. They have some axes mixed in there. They have some curved looking swords right here. I know all my Skyrim players dropping those memes in the comments right now. Curved swords. But anyway, armor of 20 as well. So these guys are just really impressive. I really like them, and I think they're a very cool unit. They look badass, even though they're looking kind of ragtaggy. You know, that's the style though, and it just looks really cool. Very useful and efficient unit. Takes up 200 of your warrior class population. These guys are great. Use them as much as you can, in my opinion. I would not form a main battle line with them, just because their defense is not all that great at only 8. Perhaps rely more so on your heavy spearmen for that, or on your other swordsmen, which we will now cover. And the next unit is your Arabian short swordsmen. These guys, it's kind of arguable if they're as good or not as the other unit. The red Sea Light Infantry are a little bit more focused on dealing severe damage against their enemies, whereas the Arabian short swordsmen are fighters. They are not necessarily designed for killing armored units, but they are here to demonstrate their excellent skill in aggression with a whopping melee attack of 11, which is really good for a unit that's basically a levy short swordsman unit. They have 300 men per unit. Their armor is once again at 20, so that is definitely very nice. Base morale of 43. Unfortunately though, their defense is only at 7, charge bonus is only at 18, and their weapon damage total combined with AP is down to 28. So They do have better attack than the last unit. They have excellent armor considering your faction. But yeah, they don't have the weapon damage of the last unit we talked about, but they also have 100 more men in the unit, so that's why I thought I would place them side by side instead of the red sea light infantry being ahead, although it's arguable that they're a more useful unit. But anyway, this is the kind of unit I would expect you to place in a very rush focused kind of army that you're trying to use to overwhelm the enemy, or if you're using them in a siege, these guys will be helpful in getting you those kills that you need with that aggression. But anyway, now let's jump on to your more high tier and elite swordsmen. And so we have your Arabian Furios soldiers. These guys are basically swordsmen. They don't have any armor piercing damage, only at 2. But they have a whopping melee attack of 13, a defense of 11, and armor of 35, which is really nice. I'm not sure if that's normal or not for Furios units to have such good armor. I thought it was a little bit lower, but either way, they desperately need armor for this roster, so I would definitely recommend they keep that stat. Just a fantastic sword unit overall. Would you use a main battle line for it? You can, but they only have 200 men in their roster, in their unit, so they'll do well, but they'll also take losses and they need to be replenished and they need something behind them to back them up. So what I might do is use like a cheap line of spearmen, especially spearmen with the archers, with the bow and arrow, that act as basically archers, and then behind them I might have some Arabian Furio soldiers ready to come in and basically deal some professional, serious damage to the enemy front line. Especially if they're going up against the lightly armored units, these guys will be amazing for you. Very useful. Obviously only available after the Furios reforms, but then we come to your final swordsman unit that we need to talk about, which is your Sabaean champions. Now this unit was added in the more recent 1.2.8 update to DEI. These guys are obviously a shock infantry unit. Any unit that has the word champion in it, chances are they are a shock infantry unit. However, this is one of those more awkward shock infantry units where they don't have any armor piercing capabilities. They still have a lot of weapon damage with a total of 34, which is impressive. However, only 2 of that is dedicated to armor piercing. So there's a good chance that they won't do as much damage against armored opponents such as Roman legionnaires, for example. But they are coming in with a whopping melee attack of 17, defense of 10, charge bonus of 22, which is okay. They have an armor of 28 and a base morale of 56. So, and they have the base. They have the discipline ability. Well, not ability, but discipline buff, I guess, to their unit. 200 men. They do have a single javelin as well as your Furio soldiers that we just talked about. An excellent unit. But they won't get as many kills against heavily armored opponents unless those opponents just get really unlucky in their defense and their armor doesn't block the damage that they're receiving. So that's it for your infantry though. Obviously you're very focused on spearmen and swordsmen basically in the second line backing them up. Your skirmishing capabilities are not very good at all. I would try to use the Arabian light archer spearman unit right here and combine that with your cavalry. We don't have a lot of cavalry, but we have some useful cavs. So let's get started with your cavalry and then we'll get onto your camels and then your chariots, of course. So starting off with your skirmisher cav, we have the Arabian light cavalry, 120 men per unit, as is the case for all of your cavalry units. Overall, a pretty solid, very, very light cavalry unit. They only have an armor of 4, but they have a very fast speed of 8. Their attack stats aren't amazing. A melee attack of 9, defensive 6 is really low. That attack is decent at 9 though, and they have a weapon damage of 33 overall. So they can deal some damage in a decent little engagement, but against armored opponents they will not do very well. So this is the type of unit that you want to do your scouting and to chase down enemy skirmishes, which is where they'll deal the majority of their damage. So they can definitely be very, very useful. And they have an ammunition of 6, which isn't amazing though, and a range of 85, damage at 21. After that though, We then move up to the Arabian Horse Archers. These guys will also be very useful for you. They allow you to have serious mobility with a very good speed of 8. They do have the Cantabrian Circle and Parthian Shot ability, which allows them to shoot in any direction, not just in front of them, which is very nice, as does your Arabian Light Cav, by the way. Not all Skirmisher Cav units have those abilities, so do keep that in mind. Your Horse Archers only have a range of 150 though, missile damage of 16, which is okay, a massive melee attack of 10, but they only have a melee defense of 4. I'm not sure where that came from. Oh, here we go. The armor piercing is at 12 and weapon damage is at 19, so these guys must have an axe in their hand. Does it say so in the description? They do have a high quality sword that it says. Okay, so I'm guessing their sword that they use is basically modified to be extremely armor piercing, assuming the statistic for their AP damage is accurate, which I have to assume it is. I can't go in assuming that, you know, every single UI has a mistake in it or anything. We're gonna, you know, trust it for now, unless I hear otherwise, and I'll be sure to let you guys know in the comment below. But wow, very useful unit, but again, only an armor of 4, which is basically non-existent for these guys. Try not to let them get hit by anything. But then we jump up to Sabaean medium cavalry. Now, this is a dedicated melee cavalry unit for you. This is also a potential general for you if you want to use this unit as a bodyguard unit. You can. Its armor is just a 28, which isn't amazing, but it's not that bad. This is a very solid mid-tier cav unit, so that's a good armor for it, I guess. Good high speed of 8, weapon damage of 20, plus an armor piercing damage of 12. Woo! Getting you a total weapon damage of 32. That's pretty awesome. Melee attack of 12 and then defense of 9. Fantastic mid-tier unit. I would definitely be using this unit in my online battles for sure. In fact, I would really like to play as a Saba now in a future online battle soon, so I'll definitely have to try that out. Now that is it for your cavalry, or at least for your horseman cavalry, although we do have 2 units of camels and a chariot to still cover. So for your camels, you have a single skirmisher unit and a melee focused unit. You have the Arabian Camel Archers first up, and comparing them to the horse counterparts behind them, these guys are slower. Their melee stats are not as good. Charge bonus is better on the cavalry though. Yeah, pretty much across the board, the horsemen are better, except for one crucial thing, of course, which is that the camels scare the crap out of enemy horses. And it is just enemy horses, it's not your own, so that's very useful for you. I would recommend having at least one on in each army, just so they can deal that scare effect. You can see down here it's listed if you'd like to see it. And they do, of course, have Parthian Shot and the Fire Whilst Moving buff. They don't have... Oh no, they do have Cantabrian Circle. Oh, that's pretty cool. I didn't think they did, but they do. So yeah, very useful unit, but I would rather have the Horse Archers as the majority in your army, and these guys basically just have one, so you can get them close to the enemy cavalry and scare the crap out of them. But then we have your Arabian Camel Spearmen. These guys are dedicated melee cavalry units. But again, we're not seeing as good statistics compared to the horsemen. These guys have no armor at 4. Your medium cav have an armor of 28. But I guess these guys are supposed to be just a light cavalry unit, so maybe that's not a fair comparison. But overall, they're still quite good. A melee attack of 8, defense of 11, charge bonus of 43. Weapon damage total of 31, with 5 of that being armor piercing. These guys are probably going to be a little bit more useful for you on the charge, but overall, useful unit. But again, I wouldn't really bring too many into your army because they're going to die very easily due to having only an armor of 4, which basically means that they don't have an armor. And they're very big. Look at that size of that camel. That is certainly going to get hit by many a javelin and arrow launched towards it. It looks at least a little bit bigger than what the horsemen do. But anyway, let's move on to your last and final unit, which is, of course, your chariots. The Sabaean chariots, you only get one version of the chariot. It's a medium chariot unit. It does not have these slides on the side of the wheels, unfortunately. It seems like only Pontus and I believe like one other faction has it. I can't remember which one off the top of my head. But these guys, they're not a very good chariot unit, but this is basically one of the very few times I would recommend you really try to use these guys. For two reasons. Number one, you get access to them on turn 1 because you have them in your starting army. So you don't have to recruit them, you already got them, which is a really big plus. At least if you're using the Grand Campaign Revised sub mod, which again, I'm basing this faction overview entirely on. Link is down below if you want to use it now, by the way, of course, as are all of the mods that I am using for this overview. But the second thing is that chariots are actually very useful in this kind of situation that the Saba find themselves in, which is their entire early game consists of fighting lightly armored troops. Even as you begin to expand into Egypt, Africa, even into Mesopotamia, the Diadochi factions will be using some light troops, so your chariots can still find success there. Your main issue with Sabaean chariots, though, will be dealing with very good enemy elite cavalry units, especially the heavily armored ones. Although light cav, they can actually really destroy if they get a good charge. These guys are very good on the charge. Plus, they get insane amounts of kills once they get into the rear of lightly armored infantry. They will get you 1,000+ per battle if you really micromanage them right and manage to blow up the enemy infantry. And because they get so many kills in a single battle, they can become veterans very, very quickly. So they even get better stats than what they already have. This is one of the few times where I can happily say I recommend you using this chariot unit. There's not all that many other times. Maybe when you're playing as like a Britain faction, like the Iceni. Although I did kind of crap on the Iceni chariots when I did their overview. But still, the same premise is their chariots can be helpful against lightly armored troops, especially. Heavily armored, not really. And they can get weighed down by heavy cavalry, or skirmishers will annihilate these guys insanely quick. So you have to treat these guys like fragile elephants. Even less protected than the elephants, actually, because the elephants have massive HP. So say if I have my formation at the front up here, keep your chariots like way back here and basically have them in a position where they can swing around and finally get behind the enemy infantry lines. But anyway, that's it for your chariots, and that's it for your entire roster, actually. A little bit of a small roster, which is a little bit of a letdown, but it is understandable. I would kind of still like to see some more options provided to them. For example, maybe another armor-piercing unit, such as a axe unit. Maybe even like a very super expensive elite kind of swordsman unit. I know they have these Sabaean champions, but I'm talking like maybe even better than these guys, but make it super expensive and only available from your noble population, just to give a little bit more variety. Basically is like a bit of an imperial unit, kind of how the factions like Media get very late tier, very good units like their epic cataphracts that they get access to. I would just like to see a little bit more to work for. The majority of your army you will get access to pretty quickly, and I mean, a lot of these units aren't all that exciting to use. There's nothing to look forward to besides your champions. Your Thurio soldiers are kind of cool, but I wouldn't really look forward to them. It's a good thing to have. And then you have the Red Sea light infantry, but you have access to those on turn 1. So, that's kind of it. Your Sabaean nobles are cool, but they're also a bodyguard unit. So, the fact that these two are bodyguard units, even though you can recruit them into your army, it is a little bit of a damper on both of them. So, I would like to see just a few more units for the Saba come forward, maybe even another skirmisher to try and just give them a little bit more options in terms of skirmishers. Maybe have like a slinger unit that also plays as a swordsman unit. We're always seeing slingers being used as slingers and also as spearmen on the side, so maybe we could do it the other way around, where we have slingers plus they have swordsman capabilities. And the Arabs were of course known for their excellent swordsmanship, so that would be really cool. But that's just my general feedback. Anyway, let's get to the part 3 section of this video. We'll talk about the verdict of the Saba. So in my recording for this overview has kind of gone for a little bit of a long time. I'm not sure what the final cut will be, but I am going to try and keep this verdict fairly short and sweet. So let's go over the situation. Basically, let's go over the pros and cons because I've been kind of going back and forth on what kind of difficulty rating I'm going to give this Saba. Before this patch and before the Grand Campaign Revised submod was displayed for all of us for public usage, in which shows us what changes will be coming to the Saba, I would have given these guys a much higher difficulty rating because before they were surrounded by enemies, whereas now they're surrounded by mostly neutral or friendly parties. So that's definitely a point in their favor. Right now, they for the most part have friendly neighbors. You will have the Himyar to yourself often declare war on you, but that's fine because you want to go take their city within the first few turns anyway, to get those trained slaves and just to get a port city nice and quickly. It's very close to your capital, so you really need to control that city for sure. But then we also lose some points because your military is for the most part pretty lightly armored. It's very small, very concentrated on demonstrating Arabian styles of fighting. You don't really have all that many other options outside of your spearmen and swordsmen. If you don't use either categories, you don't really have anything. I mean, you could try and do it all cavalry army, and that could be useful, but using all of your armies in that fashion is just not going to work. You're not going to be able to take cities, and the other factions that you end up fighting will have better cavalry than you. The Parthians, the Medians, basically all versions of the Persians. I know I'm not a rapper though. The Greeks, Rome even, Carthage, Pontus, like all of the factions that generally become big in DEI campaigns will have better cavalry than you. So you need to outsmart them, and you need to try to use the desert to your advantage. So maybe staying in Persia and the Middle East and North Africa is basically your go-to strategy, and try to avoid going into the mountainous regions of Anatolia or going further into the Mediterranean. So like I said, you definitely lose points because of your overall kind of restricted and almost poor military. But your economy early on is extremely powerful. You have massive potential through trade very, very quickly, especially if you know what resources belong where. Generally, you just want to take all of the cities around you, but like I said, if you take out the Axum, you get gold. If you take on the Indians to your northeast, you get potentially more spices and other resources up in that direction. And if you take Egypt, you get even more resources and a massive amount of food to set up your faction for life almost. So, man, you really have that going in your favor. However, your navy is terrible, so that definitely eats into you. You're definitely going to be struggling to defend your coastal cities with navies. You might not even want to bother, to be honest. But then again, your capital city of Marib is in an extremely defendable position in the heart of Arabia. It's going to be super difficult for enemy factions, especially the Westerners like the Greeks and the Romans who will be coming out eventually in the late game. They are going to struggle marching out to meet you head on. And so that's a massive plus for you, really. But then you also kind of lack certain capabilities to deal with those armies. For example, you don't have many armor-piercing units. You basically have a couple cav units that have AP damage, which is not very reliable in killing enemy infantry. And then you have one unit of your infantry that is dedicated to armor-piercing, which is the Red Sea light infantry. And that's it. You do get AOR units nearby, such as Axemen from the Axum faction, and in fact, in online battles, you can use 2 Axum Axe units in your army, so that is useful for those of you who are doing online battles as a Saba. But that's kind of all you get, which is a little disappointing for sure. And this will hurt you later on in the campaign when it comes down to fighting those heavy armored focused factions. You're going to have to rely on using units like your cavalry to try and basically outsmart the enemy, because the enemy will have at least evenly matched cavalry, if not better across the board. Plus you'll also have to try and get elephants from Syria or something. You basically need to find a way to beat those super heavily armored units, because you don't really have the capability just on a one-to-one basis. At least not really, not in my opinion. I mean, you can do it, but we really need to find some kind of super weapon that will swing the battles way more in your favor, so you're not taking such heavy casualties, such as elephants. Your chariots can be helpful, but they're not going to get a massive amount of kills against heavily armored units, unfortunately. At least I don't in my testing. To those of you who really use chariots a lot, you might do really, really well. But yeah, it's definitely not going to be easy facing those factions. So taking all of these pros and cons and basically going back and forth on an internal debate I've had for a while now for the Saba, in my opinion, they are a solid, straight up 6 out of 10 above average difficulty rating for the Saba. They're almost hard, however, they just have so many things in the positive going for them that it kind of counteracts and balances out the negative. Their early game economy is fantastic, their strategic position is fantastic, diplomacy early on is fantastic, so you kind of get to pick and choose who you attack and where. And even then, your mid-game diplomacy is going to be really nice because you get to choose between helping the Egyptians take on the Seleucids or the Seleucids take on the Egyptians, which is the way I would recommend you do it. But yeah, you have options and you're not really forced into having to fight any factions that are more powerful than you early on. So that's going to be really, really positive for you, and not something that a lot of factions can get to say, really. So as long as you can adapt to the Saba situation, in my opinion, they're almost hard, but just barely under it at a 6 out of 10, bordering on a 7 out of 10 though. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you guys enjoyed this overview. I hope you're excited to try out the Saba. In the future, I would like to do a campaign as a Saba, to be honest, although that's probably pretty far off into the future. And even then, I might try to use a submod or something that gives the Saba more units, because relying on AOR mercenary units to spice up the roster, while, you know, it's understandable and doable, I would like something just a little bit more special given to the core roster, or even not special, just a little bit more substantial, maybe, is the word I'm looking for. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I shall see you in the next one.